of Lancashire in the UK, where she is the co-director of the Institute of Creative Communities and Culture and co-director of the Centre for Children and Young People's Participation. Her research over several decades has included the uses of literacy in education and in everyday life amongst children, young people, homeless adults, and marginalized communities. She regularly uses creative activities and stories as both methods and outputs in her research, and is committed to amplifying voices of children and young people, learning from their experiences and understanding their concerns about climate change and environmental issues. So these three lovely publications, I will drop those for you in the chat box as well. And with that, I'm handing over. Prof. Satchwell, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Fatima, and thank you everybody for coming. It's very nice to be here, even though I'm thousands of miles away in Lancaster in the UK. As Fatima said, I use creative methods as or creativity as both methods and outputs. So I'm going to talk to you about a few different projects which have used various creative methods and some of the outputs as well that we've done. I can't see anything apart from the presentation now, so just bear that in mind. If anybody puts hands up or anything, I won't be able to see. But hopefully you'll have some questions which maybe we will have time at the end for discussion. So please do think of any questions or comments that you might have as we go through. So I've called this part of the presentation marginalisation, landscape decisions and arts. And marginalisation is one of the things that is important to me, I suppose, and you will have gathered that from what Fatima said and my biography, that I'm particularly interested in hearing the voices of people who may not often be heard. And when we're talking about decisions that are made about landscapes, there are whole swathes of people who often don't have a say in what happens to the landscape around them. And two of the projects that I'm going to talk about are about introducing marginalised groups to environments, natural environments that are very close to where they live, but where they may never have been before, which is quite an interesting phenomenon. You know, that there may be a nature reserve quite close to where these people live maybe in an urban environment, but they don't tend to go there. So we made a deliberate effort, and because we had the funding and the resources, we were able to allow that to happen, and we took these people to these various places. So I'm just going to briefly mention this idea of marginalisation and literacy. My title is Professor of Literacies and Education. And if we take this fairly general definition of marginalisation from Moat, to be marginalised is to have a sense that one does not belong, and in so doing to feel that one is neither a valued member of a community and able to make a valuable contribution within that community, nor able to access the range of services and or opportunities open to others. So that implies that if you are marginalised, then you feel that you are not valued and that you are not able to contribute to that community. Now, one of the reasons that this project was important to me was because the people who don't even know about the local spaces close to them that they might be able to influence, if they don't even know that they're there, then they can't have a say in what happens. So this is a little extract from the article that this presentation is largely based on, where I have said these projects aim to provide a measure of authority, and note that authority and authorship have the same root, provide a measure of the authority to groups who do not normally have that power or permission. Authorship is normally denied to those without conventional dominant literacy skills, which I have argued elsewhere with young people who are disabled. Yet those individuals are the supreme authority when it comes to their own perspectives and experiences, and simply what it is like being them. So my argument is always that if you want to know what it's like being disabled or deaf or marginalised in any way, you need to talk to those people to find out from them themselves. So the different groups that we took out into these various community spaces, which are local to them, are learning disabled adults, autistic young people, children from a deaf school, college students, youth groups, GP referrals, children supported by a charity, and children in primary schools. And we encouraged them to work with artists. So we recruited different artists to work with the different groups. And they included visual artists, sound artists, filmmakers, a poet, a storyteller, a video game creator, and woodland craftspeople. And then we took them to these various places, which included a community farm, nature reserves, a bird sanctuary, a community allotment, a coastal landscape, woodlands, and a park. Now, it's very clear that there is a great deal of benefit to be had from being in the outdoors and being in natural outdoor spaces. There is a lot of evidence for that. And there is also evidence that people with disabilities or special educational needs potentially have the most to gain from being in those spaces, and yet they are the ones who face the most barriers, not only in terms of access and physically getting there, but also in terms of attitudes, that they don't necessarily feel welcome in those spaces. Nobody makes those spaces available to them, and so they feel that's not something that they're allowed to do. However, if people are allowed to connect with nature, then there is generally a potential for an increased desire to protect those areas. If you don't know about it, you don't know that it needs protecting, so we need to introduce them to those spaces. And another argument, as you will have heard, I am very interested particularly in children and young people's perspectives. And children and young people are generally not consulted about most things, to be honest, especially the natural world and decision making about landscapes. So involving them was particularly important. Now, here are some pictures of those environments, a community farm, an allotment, and a nature reserve here. And rather than focusing on reasoning and argument, the approach of the artists was to let the participants feel. This was the important thing for artists. The participants need to feel things when they're out in these spaces. And one of the artists explained to the group that she was working with, she said, art helps us to think about things in different ways. It helps us to see what's there in a different way. Artists think about how things make you feel. And that sounds very straightforward and very simple, but it's not very often the way that we go about research projects. But these hopefully are examples where we have managed to do that. So some of the activities that we did together included walking and talking together with the workshop leaders and one another as they explored the different areas. And we all stopped to look and listen and feel and taste the fruit from the bushes and so on, and imagine what it was like to live in that space as a member of a different species. So what's it like to be a tree? What's it like to be a bird or an owl or a deer or whatever? So the participants in turn, they told and listened to stories, they drew pictures, they did whittling of wood, they made poems, and they constructed models. And then towards the end of the two projects, the artists had the role of drawing together the creations and thoughts of the group into original artworks. And these were then exhibited in a series of physical locations, but also on a website as a virtual exhibition. So here is a group of learning disabled adults, and here they are being a tree. And the written responses that you can see there, the drawings and the writing, these were produced after they had been in the woods together, experiencing what it was like, closing their eyes, imagining being a tree, listening to the wind, listening to the noise of the rain, listening to the scurrying of animals, and so on. And this experience of being in nature was essential to them experiencing the places in order for them to have an opinion on how it should be treated or looked after. So after a series of these workshops, the particular artist who was working with that group created this artwork, which she called If We Were a Forest. And I'm just going to play this if this works.
Mighty wise oak tree, strong bark, roots, acorns, green leaf, ancient, tall, lovely. I am an oak tree.
I am an apple tree.
Okay, so that piece in the exhibition was like a box, and if you looked into it, you could see this sort of hologram effect, and that film played inside the box. It was all very creative and exciting. Now, this is another group. This is a group of deaf children, and here you can see them standing on one leg and being a flamingo. This was their response to the flamingos. The small boy at the back of that picture, he decided that that was how he was going to respond to the flamingos. He became one in his own way, and then all the rest of both the adults and the children who were there stood on one leg and became a flamingo, which was all, fun and enjoyable. But it was very interesting in the sense that these children were deaf and they didn't have a visual sign for flamingo. So they made one up, which was pink swan, which was like I don't know if you can see me, but sort of like this, and the word for pink that going with it. But the embodiment of being a flamingo, as they are being here in this picture, it came to mean much more than just that word. It seemed that they'd invented this embodied sign, which meant something more like, remember what a great time we had at the nature reserve. And when I saw these children afterwards, and I went back to their school for a completely different project, and when I walked into the classroom, one of the children stood up and stood on one leg, and then the rest of the children did too, and then I did too, and we all just communicated through this sort of sign that they had made themselves, which was a kind of semiotic way of saying we enjoyed ourselves and we liked connecting with the wildlife on that bird sanctuary. And you can see in the written story that was written immediately after this tells a story and kind of allows the child to inhabit the world of another species, because we were imagining, in this case, we were actually imagining swans, to be honest, although the child calls this creature chicken flamingo. My name is called chicken flamingo. So he's kind of making an amalgamation of all the things that he's seen. And he says, and I come from Australia, although actually the swans that we were talking about had come from Iceland. But he's taking on this idea of different animals coming from different countries and coming on an enormous journey to arrive at the bird sanctuary, which is where we were. So the children in this way seem to be connecting with the idea of other species, but they were also connecting with us as researchers and with the person who was leading the art workshops. And similarly to the If We Were a Forest, this artist, who was called Claire Dean, she created an artwork, which I will show you in a moment. And what went with that in the exhibition booklet was her words: "This tendency towards negotiation and the ease in agreeing shared signs made me wonder what it would be like if we could work with birds in a shared language that was accessible to both us and to them." So the artist took on the children's ideas of making up their own signs in order to create a whole new set of signs using these mossy twigs, which were very beautiful pictures. And this explicit expression of a desire for a shared accessible language here, you could think of that as relating not only to birds and humans, but also to all people, including those who are deaf or disabled in other ways. Now, another group here, these are young people from a college. These were almost untouched woodlands that were very close to where they went to college, but they didn't know about them. In fact, hardly anybody knows about them because there's no real public access. But we managed to work with a group of woodland and bushcraft workers to help these young people to connect with this area and also to understand something about possible careers in the future. They could actually go out and work in woodlands like this to preserve them. And on the right, you can see them learning about woodland management. They were identifying all the different types of trees. And on the left, this is charcoal burning. And some of the people that we met there made a living from making charcoal. And these young people created these pieces of art in relation to their experiences. And one of them wrote a postcard from a deer, and she said, "The forest is our home. How would you like it? Imagining a stag entering your house, striding in and knocking stuff about. How do you like it?" So she was imagining, because we were walking through this almost pristine woodland, she felt as though we were treading on animals' homes, and then it made her think, well, we wouldn't like it if people came and trod through our home. So, we need to respect these other species. And this other young woman who was in the group said, "We need to stop deforestation and stop pollution. Humans think we're the dominant species, but why should we think that?" So they were really starting to rethink the way that they relate to the natural world through being out in the outdoors and by doing art. And this artist then created this piece of artwork, which is impossible to see the scale here, but it was quite big. It's bigger than it looks here. And it sat on a table with chairs around it in the exhibition. And the artist here said, "I try to include all the ideas from everyone. They all go into a funnel and lead to a core set of ideas. Then we squeeze out the essence of what you want to represent." So she was explaining this very interesting process of how you take what these young people thought and turn it into something which represents their experiences and their thoughts. And you can see there's a kind of, the stag here is standing on a kind of rug, which is made of a picture of the young people themselves in the woodland. Okay, so it's like it's like the stag standing on the young people, who are in turn standing on the land which belongs to the animals, and they're overseen by the owl. And then just a few more of these exhibits. We've got on the left-hand side, "If We Were a Forest." In the middle is another piece of work that was called The Last Supper, and this was from the workshops on a community allotment. And you can see here that the Last Supper has got a series of insects and creatures crawling across the tablecloth. They've been embroidered onto the tablecloth. and we're sharing our meals together. You know, it felt very much like that when we were all together on the allotment, with the animals sometimes feeding on us and biting us, and provide at the same time providing food that we would eat from the allotment, the fruit and vegetables. And on the right is a piece of artwork called Here in This Place, which was a very large, beautiful wooden sculpture that was carved by an artist who worked with people on a community farm. And this piece is called Here in This Place, Each Keeping Each Afloat, because this was an area that was prone to flooding, and he was imagining if it flooded, we would all be bailing our way out of there together, and we're all tied together by a rope. You can see all the different species tied together by a rope, including the human. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about those projects. I just wanted to tell you now about another project, which is not dissimilar to me because it's got the same kind of aims, but this is more precisely about climate change, and it's called Stories Across the Globe. And we wanted in this project to find out what children know about climate change, at the same time as learning about other cultures in other countries and the impacts of climate change in those different spaces. And the idea is that it would help, by understanding what it's like to live in a different country, in a different place, they would understand more about the impacts of climate change and how they vary across the world. And I'm just thinking it would be lovely to join up with children in South Africa, perhaps, because we haven't done that yet. So our first connection was between some children in the UK and children who live on a tiny island in the South Pacific. And they are, of course, at risk of flooding and they're also prone to tornadoes and hurricanes and high tides and so on. But in order to help these children in the UK to understand what it might be like to be them, they asked each other questions. And these questions were about all sorts of things, like what they ate, what they did at school, how many brothers and sisters they had, whether they had technology. They were very interested in that. Do you have rivers? Do you have any libraries? What sort of shops do you have? You know, they were interested in all sorts of things. And most of that, to them, was not related to climate change. But of course, when you think about it, everything that we do and every aspect of our lives really is connected to climate change in one way or another. But first of all, we were trying to create these relationships between them. So we set up these ways of communicating through WhatsApp and email, and we made little films in our different locations and sent them. It was almost impossible for these children to actually talk to each other in real time because of the 12-hour difference in time. You know, it was impossible to set that up. Whereas we did actually set that up with a school in Norway, where there is only an hour difference. But in this case, they did start to learn by letter writing and WhatsApp and films. And the idea of this is that it would engender some kind of empathy. Empathy was key to this project. Now here you have two groups of children in this time in the Isles of Scilly in the UK, which is a very small set of islands off the bottom of the UK, off the southwest of the UK, tiny, very beautiful islands in the UK, and Peshawar in Pakistan. And the children in the UK living on these tiny islands are very aware of climate change, much more so than the children in urban environments that we work with, which is fairly obvious, I suppose, in that they were witnessing the threat of climate change every day, really, because their islands were in danger of being flooding. And they've just had enormous sea defences built, so they feel, you know, this is a real problem. And in Pakistan, they were having very heavy rainfall at that time, and they were telling these children about that. And these are just some examples of the kind of research workshops that we were doing. These were the sort of things that we were collecting, the children's questions. Do you use any electronics? How do you work in school? And they were also telling them about what they like. So there are lots of places that can keep you entertained where I live. There are lots of places where we can go shopping. And then when they realized that how different it was in these other places, it really made them think about what their priorities were in their own lives. So when they asked, what kind of food do you eat? The children in the South Pacific said, well, we eat the food that we grow and we eat fish from the sea, which is very different from the children in an urban environment in the UK. And then, of course, I've called this schooled literacies because those very colourful kind of artistic ways of representing what they want to say that we got from them, the teachers then wanted to turn into much more formal letter writing exercises, which I can completely understand because that's what they have to do for the national curriculum. But it was interesting that this was reflected from the school in the South Pacific. These children here are from the island in the South Pacific, and they wrote back similar letters, which look, very formal. But it was a way of kind of integrating this research project into the everyday school activities that needed to be done. And we posted these letters, which was a bit of a novelty for children these days, in that they actually received letters in the post. As part of this project also, we talked to children about their feelings about climate change. And as psychologists, I'm sure you will be interested in, and I'm sure you know about these kinds of emotions that go with climate change. And these are all quotes from the children on our project. And you can see that these emotions are really important, I would say, but they're not always considered in formal education. They show that they know that this is a man-made crisis. It's because of people not taking care of the earth. They know that. All this climate change makes me feel quite sad because the planet has loads of potential, but we are just ruining it. They accept that it is the humans that are ruining it, they are saying. It's very upsetting to see the animals who have done nothing wrong, yet they have to suffer. And this, of course, is climate injustice that they're talking about. It's the people and the animals who contribute least who tend to suffer the most. I feel like in the middle of the nights it's just going to flood. This was a child in the Isles of Scilly. And if we don't take control now, then we're going to be flooded and loads of people are going to be homeless. It's scary to think that one day it might flood. It makes lots of us feel upset. And they were supporting one another. I think what was interesting about this was that we were slightly reticent about, I say slightly, we were very, reticent, worried about asking children about their feelings about climate change. But after thinking it through very carefully, we decided it would be a good idea to do that, and that we could share our own thoughts about it as well. And we found that all of the children did respond positively to that, in that we let them write down what they thought, to tell us what they thought. But then we also talked about the good things that we could do. And then we always followed it up with a positive activity. So I do feel like it was a good idea to talk to children about how they feel about climate change. We can't just pretend it's not happening, and we can't pretend that they don't know it's happening, because it is. But the quote at the bottom here is the one, we say all humans need to work together. This is one of their conclusions. But the one that is the heartbreaking comment is, if the earth was a big person, she'd be crying always. And we need to somehow stop her crying. So one of the creative things that we did with the children was to get them to write stories and come up with all sorts of different solutions. I've got very few examples here, actually, but we've just produced a book of the children's drawings and pictures, which is just amazing. I'm so pleased with it. It's really colourful, and it covers lots of stories from all the different settings that we've worked in. So that has included Pakistan, Norway, the UK, and 2 different South Pacific islands. And the way that they have kind of connected with each other and learned from one another has been really key to the kinds of stories they made. So in the story on the left here, you can see that there's a plastic bag here is actually the hero in stopping icebergs from melting. And on the right hand side, this is just a part of a story called Nature Saving Nature, which was created by children on a South Pacific island, and they are talking about their own village and what's happened to their own village. And at the end of their story, they join up with an octopus who is the hero and helps them to save the day. And animals coming to the rescue was quite a significant theme in the children's stories. Here's another one. This is from a child in the UK. This is a sea dude. Okay, he helps. He does his job. He helps solve this problem. But the important thing right at the end of this story is who's going to save the day. Let's see next time, in that little speech bubble at the bottom. So yeah, this is an important question. Who's going to save the day next time? This is an imaginary sea dude, octopus type creature, or jellyfish. I'm not sure what that is. But you know, we can't really rely on that. We need to take real action in order to do something. And to continue with this thinking, we got the children to create their own eco-heroes, and they created these heroes or heroines which had different sorts of powers, and we wanted to find out not particularly what their solutions were, although that did become interesting, but more what they thought the real problems were. And they were very interested in trees. They wanted to save trees. They wanted to depollute nature. They wanted to get all the toxins out of the atmosphere. That sort of thing, Toxyman, you've got on the top left. So we had lots of these superpowers that the children created. And the third from the left, this is Super Lola. And her superpower is flying and pausing time. And what she does is she pauses time just before someone cuts a tree down, and it makes them stop. So she saves the trees from deforestation and fires. So we can see from these kinds of things how important different aspects of nature are to the children. And, you know, we're just about to do a proper analysis of all of these stories in order to bring these to the surface. So to conclude, really, for now, one of the aims of all of these projects was prioritizing the feelings that these people had, not only in this project but in the other project, prioritizing feelings and the connections that they made, both with one another as humans across the globe, but also with them between themselves and other species. So with the trees in the natural places and with the animals and so on. And the way that we tried to do that was by facilitating different means of expression. So I'm arguing that using art is a way of enabling lots of different people to take part in expressing what they think needs to be done and expressing how it needs to be done. We wanted to promote empathy, which of course is really important in order to tackle all the crises that we have currently. We need to understand what it's like to be somebody else. We need to understand what it's like to be something else, to be a different species. And if we don't understand that, then we can't have this kind of joint collective response to climate change. We also wanted to challenge marginalisation, and by allowing these people to have a voice in some of the landscape decision making and in the way that they had their education is done. I mean, some of what we want to do is to input resources into education that may be a little bit more creative and a bit more giving agency to children, rather than relying on pre-written courses and pre-written resources that come from teachers who are, the ones who know. Children actually know a lot, and we don't always give them credit for that. And children's solutions that they've come up with are changing people's minds. This was one of the superpowers, was to change their mind, change people's minds about things, to pause time. Let's stop and think about this. Let's not just do what seems to be that we have to do immediately. Let's just take a step back and think. Let's pause. We need to rescue nature, and we need to depollute the atmosphere. And empathy with children on the other side of the world, and empathy with these other species, is a way of helping children to make change. And I think we need to help the children to do that, to make change for them, for their own futures. Okay, so I pretty much finished my presentation. I've got a I can stop sharing, and if anybody has any questions, I'm very happy to have a chat.
Thank you so much for that really amazing presentation. I really enjoyed the work that you've done, and it's really so interesting to help children to relate to other children from so far away. So your methods were really interesting and amazing. I didn't see any questions in the chat box. If anybody has any questions or would like to engage or just comment, please, you can put it in the chat box, or you can put it in, you can put on your microphone and your camera, you can ask the question yourself. Bruce, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Prof, for such a fantastic presentation that you have given us. You took me back to my childhood. The question I have for you is, what do you want for you to be able to join forces with, like you said, for example, you wanted to engage with South Africa. What is it that you're expecting from our side to be able to experience what you are experiencing with other children around the world, so that we can also have stories shared from our own country?
Yeah, I mean, that would be lovely to do that. We're always wanting to expand the project. Our problem, really, to be frank, is that we don't have any funding for it. So we kind of I've been doing this with a couple of colleagues at my university, and we really kind of have been running this project alongside all our everyday full-time jobs, But what I'm constantly trying to do is to find some money. So I am looking for funding sources, but at the moment I am trying to set up a network whereby we can include different countries in a network, which will help us to find a way of pushing this forward, so that we could, I suppose, what we could do immediately would be to join up with a primary school, maybe through somebody that through the university, a school. It doesn't have to be a primary school. We've worked in secondary schools as well. But we could perhaps connect up a school in South Africa with a school in the UK as a way of just continuing this project, and we could share the book that we've created, and we could share some of the resources for the workshops and so on, and how we've explained how we've done it. But on a longer term, it would be nice to set up some sort of network where we can discuss together what would be the best way of doing this, so that it isn't so much led by the UK as it is at the moment, really, but it is more of a sharing properly amongst the different countries that are involved. So if you are interested, please just get in touch with me, and then I'll see if we can find a way of including you or your school or your country in an application or a network.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question. It sounds like it has been going on for some time now. Do you find some of the students who were young learners at the time that you did this have now decided to join your organization, or are interested at least in ensuring that they advocate for this sustainability?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I haven't done that kind of longitudinal study of the people involved. It has been going on for a while, but we haven't tended to follow the young people from one place to another. But that is a very good question, and you're making me think we should do that. What we tend to do is work with the children at the upper end of primary school, and then we kind of lose touch with them when they go into secondary school. But that is a good point, and I will bear that in mind. Thank you. That's actually really helpful. Yeah, I'm sure there are ways that we can follow them up. I mean, I hope that it does have an impact on them. This was actually, though, another reason for doing this in primary school, because I know that when I was in primary school, there are certain things that happened which were really influential. And I don't know if that everybody shares that, but I think there is a time in life, maybe, you know, as a psychologist, you could explain this to me, a time in between the ages of kind of 5 and 10, things happen at that stage that can be really significant for things that happen later. And I know there is evidence for this in terms of connection with nature, that it tends to be at that age, before they get to adolescence, if they've got that kind of grounding in a relationship with nature before they become sort of 13, then they'll come back to it later, even if they sort of move away during their teenage years. So I think it is a good idea to work with children who are quite young in order to kind of instill some interest in the rest of the world, and to, you know, it's not just about climate change, it's about cultural competence and understanding what it's like to be in a different culture, doing different things, and yet they're all children, you know, they're all kids, and that's what they recognize in each other.
Right. Tato, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that I do agree with what you're saying. And my main question is, were you able to find out if the home environment specifically played any role in how these children felt about climate change? Because I know you mentioned empathy, you know, and emotion. And so I want to find out, did the home environment play any role in how these children perceived climate change? Because I just want to understand if children are being taught to care about the environment in their households besides school and society. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think the answer is that it is very varied, as you would expect. You know, even within one class of children in the same town, they will have very different experiences at home. So I remember talking to a young boy, I think he was 9 years old, and he was very sadly telling us that he sees his dad quite infrequently, and when he does, his dad's car is full of rubbish, and his dad tells him to put the rubbish out the window as they're going along.
No.
And the boy was really upset that this is what his dad was telling him to do, and he didn't want to do it, but he was a bit scared of his dad, and he ended up doing this. So, you know, that's a very sad example, I think, of how the home environment can influence what the children do. But I did find that when we did start to work with them, and they started to understand a bit more about the connections between different aspects of their lives, for example, what they eat, you know, and the environmental impact of different kinds of food that they hadn't really thought about at all. Those sorts of things tended not to be talked about at home, or even at school, actually, because I think I'm absolutely not blaming teachers, but I think they themselves are not confident to teach about climate change in any very knowledgeable way, and they're a bit worried about any questions they might get. They're a bit worried, as I said earlier, about upsetting the children if they kind of lay it out as it is. Yeah, so I think maybe they're not getting it either at school or at home in a way that is really useful. And this is one of my problems, I suppose.
No, I get it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amos, you can go ahead.
Hi. Thank you, Professor. On the methods you used on the differently abled, you mentioned one of them. One of the stories you mentioned was the being flamingos, and I was wondering in pulling in the creative methods, was there like, you mentioned touch being a very key one, had the feel, it touched the grass, the trees, the hug the trees. Was there sound used as well? Now sound in the sense that the deaf children maybe being close to a speaker, kind of feeling the frequencies and vibrations of the different bird sounds, the flamingo, the swans. Well, there's elements in play as well to kind of create this holistic experience as they connect with nature in different ways.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, we were trying to use multi senses, all the senses as far as we could. And of course, children who are deaf are not, they just don't hear nothing, or, as you say, there are different frequencies and different ways of responding to noise. And as it happened, the artist who was working with them was also partially deaf, and so she was in a very good place to understand how that would work with those children. And she did have certain, as well as communicating through signs, we did also speak, and the children were very much encouraged to speak by their teachers and their support workers generally in life, because they feel it's going to help them fit in better later, which is maybe another argument in terms of deaf education. But yeah, I'm trying to think of an exact example from with the deaf children, but I know that it was still an important aspect of the way that they experience nature. But just because you've mentioned sounds, I'm going to just mention that one of the things that we did in the woods with the learning disabled adults was to create a soundscape. And that was working with a soundscape artist. And all of the participants were encouraged to make different sounds to represent the sounds of birds or animals or rain and so on. And that was a really lovely way of focusing on a particular sense, and which allowed them to experience things in a very different way. So yes, it was a particular aim of that project, was to not only to be a multi-species project, but also a multisensory project. And when we had the exhibitions, the idea was that they were exhibits that you could interact with, that you could listen to them. There were recordings, for example, of poems, and there were recordings of soundscapes and noises of the woods, but there were also things that you could touch, and actually we didn't have anything you could eat specifically that was an exhibit, but things that you could play with a bit. So it was designed to be multisensory and interactive. But I haven't quite answered your question, I know, about the deaf aspects of it, but that is an interesting point.
Just the inclusion of a creative was also hard of hearing, kind of also pulls that experience together for the children, I would assume. Yep. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So just for notification purposes, I have put the Facebook link into our group chat, into the group chat that we have over here. So you can log on to our Facebook page and then find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and various other platforms. I have copied the articles that you can access I have tried to actually share the article, but for some reason I'm unable to do so. And then I've got 2 comments in the chat box. The first comment is fascinating. Thank you very much. And the second one is thank you. Really enjoyed this, and I hope to make use of some of these messages in promoting conservation concern. So those are the 2 comments in the chat box. So do we have any other questions or comments that anyone else would like to make? Right. So, Prof. Candice Satchwell, thank you so much for this really amazing presentation. You've contributed towards the international movement towards really using creative methodologies more inclusively in the work that you are doing across disciplines, interdisciplinary as well as cross-disciplinary. So I'm really looking forward to actually reading your article in much more depth, and hopefully we'll have some collaborations moving forward. Wanted to put, if possible, could you maybe put your email address, or let me just check?
I will. I'll put it in the chat, because I'm very
Yeah.
happy to hear from anybody if they want to get in touch.
I think it would be really interesting to see how South African children are thinking about climate change in South Africa and doing a comparison.
Yes, indeed.
So so you've put the Prof's email address is in the chat box. If you would like to engage with her and see what it is that you can do to collaborate, that would be lovely. Please keep us in mind, CEPD, for any of the work that you do, so that we can maybe do another webinar on any of the outputs you have from any of the work that you do. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Have a lovely week ahead. Next week we have Prof. Clayton that will be doing a lovely presentation on psychology and climate change as well. And we hope to see you there. Thanks, Prof. Candice. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.